everybody, once again. Welcome to the Be the Change, How Creativity Can Help You Take Control workshop. I am Laura Borsch from Base Amsterdam, and I have the pleasure to introduce you to the host of the session, David Chislett, a creativity activator from the Netherlands. David will answer your questions through the session, so please feel free to type your questions in the chat section, and he will answer them one by one. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, Laura. Cool. Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. So, as Laura says, I will be monitoring the chat as I go along. I will do my best to answer the questions as we go. It's my intention to keep this session as interactive as possible. I don't really like just being a talking head and then we have a Q&A at the end. It's much nicer if you can jump in with your questions as they happen. However, please note that I am also doing some screen sharing, and while I'm sharing my screen, I can't see the questions. So if there's a bit of a lag in the answering, that's probably what's going on. So let's get started. But first of all, we've got to actually get my slideshow working. So let's try that dramatic introduction again. Let's get started and share the screen. So, change is probably the thing that all human beings fear the most. We don't like to talk about it, but it really isn't our favorite thing, despite the fact that as human beings, we are changing all the time, and the technology that we have invented is changing our world at a startling pace. While researching for this presentation, I found a remarkable graph, which just shows that how much things have changed and how fast they've started to change since the left-hand side of the graph, which is the 1850s. And then where the line is the 1950s. And you can just see, as soon as IT technology has taken off, how steep that graph has become. And yeah, we're standing on the edge of a cliff, and it's unknown and it's frightening. And especially if you're in startup land, or scale-up land, where we are now, it can be pretty disconcerting. Well, yes, but also actually no. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is I'm going to be giving you some really concrete tips and tools and ideas to help you deal with the ubiquity of change, and so that it doesn't become such a scary thing like you're about to drop off the end of the cliff, but that rather it's just part of business as normal, because it is business as normal. I'm sure you've all heard the biological fact that every month or so, or certainly once a year, not a single cell that was in your body at the beginning of the year is still there by the end of the year. You are literally physically different all the time. And that physical difference is mirrored in the technology and in the society around us. In other words, if you're going to act like you found the perfect answer, the one way or the only way to do things, you're going to get a very rude surprise. Sooner or later, something's going to change. A new piece of technology will be invented, or people will just quite simply lose interest in their particular product area that you are involved with. And if you think that sounds a bit far-fetched, just consider the music industry. 40, 30 years ago even, the music industry was one of the biggest earners on the planet. And then this little thing called an MP3 was invented. And essentially, the ability to make music files small and easy to share across the internet broke the business model of the music industry. But because they thought they had control of everything and that they were a big, powerful bunch of people, instead of seeing that and understanding that and changing and adapting, they spent 15 to 20 years fighting it in the courts and trying to get it to go away. And it didn't. But on top of that, the way we consume music has also changed. When I was a kid, we literally used to hunt down other people's parents who were going on international trips and say, can you find this record in the specialist store for me? And we used to trade, and it was really hard work to find the good stuff. Now, thanks to the internet and MP3s, it's just so easily available that almost no one has the kind of identity issues associated with music that people of my age had growing up. So it's completely different. And this is going to happen to every single industry on the planet. Sooner or later, someone's going to find a different or a better or a cheaper way to do it. So you might as well gear yourself up immediately to have that kind of mindset from the start. And so that's definitely the first thing that I want to talk about. And that is the creative mindset. I want to talk to you a little bit about what that actually is and what it looks like. And it would be really nice if my slideshow would actually work. There we go. So the creative mind state is a really interesting thing, because when I say mind state, I don't mean a state of mind as in a mood or an attitude. I mean literally a biological state. But you do need to have a particular focus, a particular way of looking at the world. And essentially, it has three requirements. Number one, you need to be open to ambiguity. In other words, you need to give up on certainty. You need to give up on this is right, this is wrong, this is black, this is white. You need to let go of what you know or what you think you know and admit that there may be other answers. And you need to step into that space. And it can be a very threatening space for people because you don't know. And there's so much pressure on us to be professional, to be clear. But if you want to know something new, you've got to let go of what you already know. Not forget it, not throw it away, just let go of it. Step into the ambiguity. The second important attitude is you need to be open to complexity. You know, we do live in an instant gratification society where simplicity is the order of the day. But in actual fact, very few things in this world are simple. Everything is connected, and trying to control things and keep it simple always leads to unintended results further down the line, because things do not exist separately. Nothing is separate. They're all in systems, and those systems are open. And by trying to control them and act as if they're closed, you cause havoc, because that's not actually what's going on. And then the third very important mind state is that you need to be open to novelty. In other words, you need to actually actively be looking for new answers, for new ways of doing things. And, you know, that's a really important attitude. Quite often, companies and people are doing things a very specific way. Why? Well, because that's just the way that we've always done it. And you know, that's just such a limiting perspective, because it basically assumes that there is no other way, or that, quite unreasonably, you've discovered the actual only or right way. Now, as soon as you do that, you're shutting yourself off. You're closing the door. You're shutting down discussion. You're limiting options for growth. So it's incredibly important to cultivate those three mind states. Open to ambiguity, open to complexity, and seeking novelty. Wow, okay, so that sounds like fun. But how do we do this, and how will you recognize it? Well, there's some very other interesting things that have come out of neuroscience when it comes to the whole issue of creativity. Using CAT scans, CTI scans, neurologists have discovered that there are very specific physical brain states required for creative thinking. The first one is that you need to have mental quiet in your head. Now, I don't mean, you know, it needs to be quiet in your room. I mean, literally, there mustn't be too much going on in your head. Now, the reason for this is that the aha moment, when you have a good idea, when you solve a problem, when you suddenly you see the solution in front of you, that fires off a couple of hundred neurons. Now, when neurons fire, they make a very, very quiet snap, crackle, and pop sound, like bare electrical wires. Thankfully, so quiet you can't normally hear it. But when you're deciding what to have lunch, or whether you should choose the red shoes or the blue shoes, that fires off tens of thousands of neurons. Meaning that if you're thinking too much, if you're worrying, if you're trying to multitask, you're doing a lot of things at once, you may not even hear the aha moment going on in your head because of all of the neuron noise that is happening there. The second really important brain state is that you need to be inward looking. In other words, not considering what people out there in the world might think or what else is going on or, am I going to reach my target or anything like that. You need to be busy with your own stuff. You need to be thinking about what you're going to do, what you know, and how you're going to progress. The third one is great. You need to be slightly happy. It's quite a cool one, this, because if you think, well, creativity is positive, right? You've got a thing and you join it with another thing or you add, and you get more. Creativity is about making more. And it's no coincidence that you need to be in a positive frame of mind. But let's, you don't have to be deliriously happy, like laughing and rolling about on the floor. Essentially, you just need to be in a positive frame of mind. It helps enormously. And then the last one is that you mustn't try too hard. And I think that for almost everybody is without doubt the most difficult of the brain states. You really have to take it easy on yourself when you're problem solving. Because yes, Jeremy, the shower is the place where many people have their best ideas. Why? Well, because you're not thinking about much. You've got mental quiet, all right? You're definitely inward looking because you're in a box and all you're focused on is, oh, that feels good. It's nice and warm, which means you're slightly happy. And you're not trying too hard because, you're an adult. By now, you know how to shower, hopefully. So being in the shower admits to all four of those neurological state requirements. So here's a quick challenge for everybody. If you can drop into the chat, where are you when you have your best ideas or when you have any idea? Where are you? So we know Jeremy's in the shower. Where are the rest of you when you have a good idea? Walking, yes, on my butt. Sleeping. Now, we're going to talk about that in a moment. Half asleep's a good one as well. Walking in the park, staring at my plants in the garden. All of these things are stuff that we do on autopilot. They don't require conscious presence because we've done it many times before. It's something we enjoy. This is all hugely important stuff. Now ask yourself, when you're busy with your business, where have you created space where you can experience a similar state of mind? Have you? And I'm not laughing at you, Dimphna. Actually, I find vacuum cleaning very meditative, ironing as well. So, you've got to allow for this. Create inspiration, create thinking, problem solving. It's not magic. It doesn't just drop out of the heavens into your head like magic. You've got to be in the right brain state so that you can hear it when it does happen. So you need to look at your everyday and figure out, wow, where can I create this space? Because it's not about forcing it. You've got to hold the space. You've got to turn up and do and practice your skills. Because without the skills, it's very hard to express the creative thinking. So you'll find that people who don't turn up every day may have fantastic ideas, but the end product isn't so great because the actual production skills that they have aren't up to the task of making something good out of even a brilliant idea. So that brings us to the next super important thing I want to share with you, which is that you have got to be thinking very much about making space. It just isn't a coincidental thing that happens that you wake up one day and you've got a great idea. Creativity is not a one-level mental activity. It's an incredibly complex phenomenon. In fact, I'm beginning to believe that it's almost quantum. This idea that something can either be a particle or a wave, or actually both at the same time until you look at it. And creativity is a bit like that in some ways. So if you're not holding space for it, if you're trying to decide that it must be this, it must be that, you're trying too hard, you're going to push it out the door. And in the 1960s, a well-known American psychologist by the name of Mel Rhodes spent a lot of time trying to come up with a definition of what creativity was. And he tried to do that by taking all the existing definitions, getting them all together and trying to extract the core. And he failed. But what he did come up with is a thing called the 4 Ps. And the 4 Ps of creativity, according to Mel Rhodes, is the creative person, the creative product, the creative process, and the creative press. And by the press, Mel Rhodes means the environment that the person who is trying to be creative exists in. And this is really important, because what I just said about creativity being quantum, if you look at the 4 Ps, person, product, process, and press, you actually can't really get creativity if you're missing one of the Ps. So as a person, you need to be doing something with your creativity-related skills, but you also need to be thinking about how you do things. Can you change? Can you grow? Can you learn something? But you also need to think about the what that you're creating, the product. And last of all, you've got to be very, very aware of your environment. And I do believe we're going to come back to the environment a little bit later on. But essentially, the space that you're in, the people who are around you, the objects that are in your space all contribute massively to your ability to go back into the creative state of mind that I spoke about right at the beginning there, where you are mentally quiet, inward looking, slightly happy, and not trying too hard. If you've just got a problematic person in your space, you're going to struggle to not try too hard to be able to be inward looking. It's hugely important. One of the additional extremely important factors of being creative is also to make sure that you are collecting the dots. One of my favorite short ways of explaining what creativity is to essentially claim that what creativity is no more than a process of collecting dots. And the more dots you have, the more interesting connections you can make. So you don't have to be an expert in a field to be creative. But if you know a hell of a lot about a particular subject, that means you can make connections to that deep knowledge that reach out to people's everyday experiences, and thereby you bring something that's fundamentally new and different into people's lives. And because you've got this deep well of specialist knowledge and a broad range of generalist knowledge, typically that huge number of dots raises your chances of creating something that will be of interest to other people. And, well, not that it of being, who cares? Because at the end of the day, as long as being creative and coming up with cool things is making you happy, we're not too fussed about what other people think. But we're talking about business here and scaling up. And if you want your product, your service to sell, you've got to have people interested in it. So having some kind of specialist knowledge is great. But if you stay in the specialist well, no one will understand. You could have come up with something absolutely mind-blowing, amazing. But if there's no bridge to the everyday, if you don't join that dot, people are just not going to get it. So, how do you get more dots? Well, I'd like to see what you guys think, but for me, I read a lot. And I don't just read, stuff about creativity or leadership or entrepreneurship. I read history. I read science, quantum mechanics, for example. I read science fiction. I read across the board because all of these things are giving me sparks of ideas. They're giving me little points that allow me to drape ideas over and to make links and connections that I wouldn't have thought of if I hadn't uncovered that information. So, yeah, podcasts, Sarah, that's a great one. Podcasts are a huge thing. Going to classes, yeah, lectures, indeed, any good conversation. Coochies and Colpheus, not so much. YouTube. You know, if you want to learn how to do anything in this world, someone on YouTube's created a how-to video, trust me. So just type it into, you know, YouTube is still the second biggest search engine on the planet. So if you want to know how to do anything, go to YouTube. And yeah, physical experience, go out there, try stuff, get started. Don't stay at home. You know, probably the worst impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown has been the limitations it's put on our ability to actually go out into the world and experiment. So here's the question. Out of that long list of things that have come up in the chat and what I've mentioned, how many of those is it impossible for you to access? None of them. It's easy. They're low-hanging fruit. In other words, you can seriously enhance your ability to problem solve, to come up with new ideas, to invent new solutions and new products, and in an effort actually change who you are. It's well within your reach, but you've got to start. You know, you've got to actually do something. Just thinking about it ain't gonna help very much. Another hugely important tool on your journey towards enhancing your creative abilities is sparring. And no, I don't mean getting into a fight with your business partner like these two guys over here, but I do kind of mean exchanging blows. In other words, don't just talk to people who agree with you, who share your point of view. Talk to people who challenge you, who say to you, are you sure? Because what about this? And I know that this works like this, which would seem to imply that what you're saying might not actually happen. And actually forcing you to come up with a good explanation to check that your idea does what you say it's going to do. You know, sparring is enormously important. It allows you to test drive ideas in a fairly safe environment. And at the same time, it really helps you get clear on how to talk about what you want to do. You know, we've all got ideas. It's not always easy to explain those ideas to other people. There's a great Einstein quote which says, if you cannot explain your fantastic new idea in one simple sentence that a 10-year-old would understand, you haven't thought about it enough. And that's pretty brutal, but it's true, you know, because if you've really thought about it, you should be able to answer almost any question. And a sparring partner, a slightly antagonistic co-worker, friend, partner, is only going to bring out the best of you by making sure that you've found all the weak spots of your fantastic new idea before you go to MVP, before you take it to market, before you invest all your hard-earned cash and your investors' funds into a thing that may or may not do what you said it will. So that's all very lovely yap, yap, yap. Does anybody have any specific questions they'd like to ask of me before I dive into the next section of this presentation? So if you've got a specific question about anything that I've said up until now, please pop it into the chat now, and I will quickly respond before I move on to the next part of the presentation, as it were. No? No one typing vigorously? Am I making perfect sense? Thanks, Renee. Good to know that you're listening, all 35 of you. It's quite weird not being able to see anybody and just see all these numbers up there, I must say. It's odd. All right, so, you know, I'm always a fan of keeping things really, really concrete. So my plan now is to share with you some very specific tools that you can use to help you with your creative thinking. Because I'm a huge believer that creativity will set you free. It'll set you free from your limitations. It'll set you free from your societal constraints. But to get there, sometimes you need to first set yourself free. So these tools are all intended with that thought in mind. So yes, this is all a bit clunky, I'm afraid. Sorry. So let's have a quick look at these tools. And these are all these are thinking tools. You don't have to go out and buy anything. It's the beauty of creativity, right? Because we're all creative. I mean, you live in Amsterdam and you're going from east to west and the bridge is up, but you're in a hurry. You very quickly are going to be able to think of an alternative route. I mean, that's a creative act. Every problem you solve every day, from using a butter knife as a screwdriver to wedging a piece of paper under the restaurant table leg, is a creative act. It's just that as a society, we are very biased towards creative acts which involve incredible levels of skill, like acting or painting or singing or making music. But on a biological level, the same thing is happening in your brain when you wedge a piece of paper under the table leg as is going on in Lady Gaga's head when she writes a new song. It's true, I promise. So, tool number one, the easiest one of all to say, probably the hardest to do. You've got to release judgment. What on earth do I mean by that? You've got to stop forming an opinion about how good your ideas are or how bad they are. You've just got to, because remember, step into the ambiguity, step into the complexity, seek out the new. You can't do that if you're judging everything. If you're saying, there's only one way to do this, that's judgment. If you're saying, yeah, but I'm not creative, that's judgment. If you're saying, but that's just stupid, that's judgment. There is no such thing as a bad idea. No, there isn't really. There is such a thing as an idea that hasn't been worked to its full final form yet. But if you don't let go of judgment, you will lose a lot of what could end up being really good ideas. So this is what happens in meetings and brainstorm sessions. I've got a great idea, and you pour your heart out with this fantastic concept that you've had in your head for a while, and someone in the room goes, yes, but, and that's it. Dead in the water. Idea killed. Momentum killed. Yes, but judgment. It's harder than you might think to let go of this stuff, and it's more important than you might think that you do. Because if you let go of the judgment and you say, yes, and if we added this, if we took that away, if we put it in this environment, if we tweaked it, suddenly you're rolling. We've got some momentum, and then some interesting stuff can happen. So I'm going to play a little game with you quickly if you're up for it, all 34 of you. I see I've scared off 2 people already. This is a great challenge that I love to do with people. In the chat, everyone, and don't think too hard, remember, because that's not creative, and don't judge it. Whatever pops into your head, put it into the chat. I want to see in the next 30 seconds as many alternative uses for an umbrella as you can think of. All right? Go for it. Start typing. What other things can you use an umbrella for? Whoa, geez, you guys are fast. Boom, boom, boom. Keep going, keep going. Yes, yes, yes. Good. We're seeing the stick and the parasol and the boat are coming past a few. A shield, nice. Garden pond. Tree something behind the refrigerator. I think I've actually done that. A drum, a parachute, toothbrush. Well, why not? A dance prop, bucket, microphone. Okay, stop. Now I want you to add, every single one of you, at least one other use that is not on that list. Something completely different. Nice, Renee. Seducing your mom? Dude. Emergency fish tank. Lampshade. Come on, everybody. Push it. Dibber for gardening. Nice. Fan, air mover, carrier bag, door. Now you see what's happening here. In the first part of the exercise, I got all the stuff I see every time: walking stick, water collector, water filter, sunshade. Obviously, the things that fit the pattern, the stuff that we already know. Now, releasing judgment, pushing the barrier, going again, suddenly we start to uncover new stuff, slightly more interesting stuff, things that maybe you wouldn't have thought of before, stuff you'll only get to when you say yes and, stuff you'll never see when you say yes but. Okay, guys, you can stop now. Thank you. I think you get the point. It's not about what you immediately come up with. It's about where you go with it, which means you've got to step into the ambiguity. You've got to step into the openness. You've got to let go of your attachment to a particular answer and get going. And yeah, I put the pressure on you. So of course you felt a bit more inhibited, which was naughty of me because I was trying to make you think too hard. It's something that you can practice, though. You can do this over and over again with any number of objects or in any number of situations. And it's a really simple exercise. And I promise you, you will astonish yourself at what you're actually able to come up with when you push through the obvious and carry on going. On a practical level, what this means is the next time you are invited to a brainstorm, you should do part one alone, at home, at your desk before you go. Everybody should. Get the boring old blah stuff out of the window and then go into the room and do the second level. I'm not sure about sorting Lego into colors, Mary Louise. I'm not sure. But maybe. Doing a mindless activity often takes the rational brain offline, which means that you find it easier to find connections between thoughts and objects. So possibly, actually, yeah. But yeah, if you need new ideas, part one, then part two. Like Beth just said in the chat, that's the way it's gotta go. All right, so that's one cool technique you can use. It's a very handy thinking tool. Yes and, not yes but. All right, so, oh, look at that. We're still on release judgment. We don't want that. Now, the next thing, and this is a remarkable thought. It comes from a guy called David Eagleman, who is a neurologist. In fact, he's just released a book that I've got to buy, a brand new book all about the brain and our consciousness. And he's amazing. But this idea comes from his book called The Runaway Species. And basically his theory is that due to the fact that humanity is creative, we've kind of run away with ourselves and created this bizarre world that we live in. But what he says is that if you stop and you analyze any creative thought, any creative product, anything that anyone's done that's like new, that's different to what went before, you will find that actually it's not that new, that it is either a bend, a blend, or a break. All right, so there's three different techniques: bending, blending, and breaking. I'm going to stop sharing the slide so I can talk about it and see the chat at the same time. So, what is a bend? A bend is when you take something that exists and has a specific purpose and you bend it to another purpose, to another use. I mentioned a classic example earlier is when, the door handle's loose, you don't have a screwdriver handy, so you grab a butter knife. That's a classic bend, sorry. So, what a lot of people are doing now is they're taking business models or business systems or approaches that work in one industry and they're bending it to another. Agile's like the example of this. Agile's a software development project management tool, essentially. And it's been bent into a general business fix-it tool that is applied across industries all over the world at all sorts of different levels. It's a classic bend. So quite often, applying principles from one industry and another industry is massively surprising and hugely effective. So don't be scared of doing that. There is literally Nothing new under the sun. There's an awesome book by a guy called Keynote. Oh, what's his first name? It's called Steal Like an Artist. And he gives 10 really awesome tips about how to steal. Because, you know, it's not actually plagiarism because you do something with it. It's your influence, it's your starting point, it's a jumping off point. Let's move on to the second one, which is a blend, which is where you take two separate things and you join them together in a new, unique way to do something else. And I think, you know, you've all got a blended thing with you right now. It's generally known as a smartphone, you know, where technology allowed us to take the technology of a telephone and a camera. And did anyone remember a Palm Pilot, personal organizer, the internet connection, and a video camera, and whatever else, and shoved it all together into one thing? The central idea of a smartphone is not that unique, you know. It's a computer. But what was unique was like, let's make it small. You blend all these things together and you change the form, you change the end product, you know. So again, in a business sense, in a business space, if you're stuck and you just can't move ahead, look around you and see, what can I take from other places? What can I jam together to come up with a new combination which might break this log jam, which might change my way of thinking, which might tackle my audience in a new and exciting way? It's an incredibly liberating thing to do. And the last of the three things that David Eagleman notes is a technique he calls breaking, which is the opposite of blending, right? So you take a complex thing and you break it apart, and then you reassemble some of the pieces, all of the pieces, in a new way to come up with something that appears to be totally new, but except, of course, it's not. The example I like to give is fairly arty, but if you think about what Picasso did with Cubism, was he's like, well, I can look at a woman from this angle, and I can look at her from this angle, and I can look at her from this angle. But classically in painting, we have one point of view. And he was like, well, that's boring. I can see all these other points of view. I'm going to represent all of them on a flat plane. And we got Cubism. He broke the different points of view down and then reassembled them in one place on one level. Next time you're stuck and you really need to solve a problem, you really need to go somewhere, you can just very consciously work through these three tools. What have I got, or what exists out in the world that I can bend, that I can take from this function and apply to this situation or this problem over here? What can I put together in a unique combination? What can I break into pieces to come up with potential new answers? And if you are seriously interested, I can honestly recommend you buy the book. I'm just typing it into the chat over here, The Runaway Species by David Eagleman. Super cool book, and actually pretty easy to read for something that was written by a scientist. Any questions, people? You're being very quiet here. I was kind of hoping for a bit more. It's late in the day, your brain's fried. Processing. All right, cool. In that case, I'm going to move on to the last technique tip that I want to share with you. And that one is really simple, really, really simple. Ask what if. Yeah. And you see how this combines letting go of judgment. What if toys had feelings? What if bugs have feelings? What if monsters? I mean, these are all Pixar films, right? And just asking that what if question puts you into a place where suddenly you have a scenario. A whole world opens up. You know, you're in a new press, you're in a new environment where suddenly there are options. Suddenly there are new roads to follow. You know, an exercise I like to do with my clients is, okay, imagine that you have all the money you need, you have all the people who can help you, and you have all the skills required to do this thing. What then would your business look like? And just go for it. Just biggest possible picture imaginable. What if? Yeah, let loose. Yeah. Because once you know what that looks like, then you can ask the question, so if that's what it can look like over there and I'm over here, what steps do I need to take to get there? Yeah, exactly. It's reverse engineering. I mean, it's not rocket science, right? It's not even new. But it started by the what if question. And too many of us don't want to ask what if because, I don't know, it's childish, or I am an adult and I'm supposed to know. It's admitting that you don't really, or it's fantasy and that's just not real. It's not concrete enough. And it's just bollocks, you know? I mean, I hate to use him as an example, but what did Zuckerberg say when he was starting off with this thing that ended up being Facebook? He said, what if we could create a platform where people could interact one-on-one over the internet and not have to go through any kind of gatekeeper? Now, we wish we had a gatekeeper. What if it was actually financially viable to build electric cars and have recharging stations? Elon Musk. What if everyone could have a computer at home? Bill Gates. I mean, if you don't think big, you can't go big, because huge ideas can be scaled down and executed step by step. But it's very hard to scale up a small idea because it's small, it's mean, there's not much room to breathe, it's easily achieved. Yeah, maybe it's a module, then you can build something else onto it, but as the idea itself. So don't be scared and don't judge yourself and don't beat yourself up for being all childlike or what have you. Just ask and just do it. So, question from Lauren. This is an interesting one. Doesn't that case prove an interesting point about including forecasting and implication mapping? Ah, yes. So, I think forecasting and implication mapping are incredibly good tools. But I think if you get too hung up on the specific outcome that is associated with those tools, you run the risk of losing the big picture and becoming too focused on one point on the horizon. I'm much more of a big believer in fuzzy goals. So in other words, it's not so much about going to this point, but rather going in this direction. So when we're talking about forecasting and mapping, I think it's always a good idea not to become too emotionally attached to the map. And sure, make the map, because maps are quite useful. But don't be too hooked up when you suddenly get to a junction where something unexpected happens, which takes you down a road that wasn't marked on the map, or creates a whole new road. Just go for it. It's as long as it's going in the right direction, as long as it's heading in the right fuzzy part of the world, go for it. Now, fuzzy goals, disclaimer, I'm kind of stolen from the game storming people. It's a term they use a lot in the game storming book. You see, the trouble is when you have a very specific goal, you are effectively forming a judgment. You're saying, this is it. It can only be this thing and this thing only, and we're only going to do things that are going to take us to this exact thing. And, the world doesn't work like that. I mean, you guys are all you're looking to scale, so you've been through startups, so but where you are now, it could be quite sort of far away from what your original idea was. And if you were too emotionally invested in your original idea, you're going to struggle to scale because everything's going to change. And you need to be open to that, and you need to embrace it. Or you need to be happy to stay where you are. That's also an option. So Marie-Louise, you were asking about the reverse engineering process. The creativity involved in getting to that big idea is not always linear. No, it's not. And that brings me back to what somebody said earlier on in the questions about sleeping, coming up with ideas when you're sleeping. Now, you see, a lot of the time we have ideas and it feels like magic because we're not consciously aware of our rationalization process. And that's because it wasn't a conscious rationalization process. It was a subconscious one. When you sleep, and when you go into REM sleep, when you dream, your brain goes through what is essentially a defragging process where it sorts through all the information, the experiences, and categorizes and groups and compares and chucks things out and decides what to keep. But the system that it uses is not rational or logical or linear in the way that we recognize it in our waking minds. It's, it's obscure. It throws all sorts of stuff that just doesn't belong together. And if you don't believe me, think about your last dream. That's your subconscious, your unconscious in action. And so this is what's going on when you're sleeping and when you're daydreaming. And it's a much slower process than our rational minds. Our rational minds are pretty quick. I mean, in fact, this is explained in depth by a wonderful book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. Thinking rationally is about using patterns and tools and established ways of thinking to generate logical consequence and motivator and result driven thinking, whereas unconscious, subconscious thinking is not. And what's so cool about this is that you can deliberately drop stuff into your unconscious and wait for it to spit it out. Next time you've got a big problem on your mind and you really need a solution and you can't see the way out, before you go to bed, say, I really need to sort out this problem, and think through the problem in the most clear terms you can, and go to sleep. And when you wake up in the morning, you need to have a pen and a pad next to your desk, write down what you were dreaming about. And do this for a week or two, and you'll be amazed at what comes out. So no, it's not always linear. The big idea can appear to come out of nowhere, except that it doesn't. It's part of the joining of the dots process, but it's not the rational, everyday, wide awake joining of the dots. It's this sort of weird, dreamy, irrational, unconscious joining of the dots. And it's super important because there is no judgment in the unconscious. Judgment is a self-conscious, it's a rational function of our intelligence. And it's great, but it has its limitations because it recognizes patterns. It recognizes things that already exist and extrapolates, says, well, this has happened every day and A plus B equals C, so therefore in the future. And yeah, that's great because that brings us a lot, but it doesn't apply to everything. And if you want to get to the really deep and interesting stuff, you need to let it go. And so as the sort of roundup to the presentation side of this workshop type thing that we're doing here today, I wanted to leave you with this lovely John Maynard Keynes quote, that it's not that coming up with ideas is so difficult, because it isn't. We have them every day. What is our challenge is getting rid of the old ones. The difficulty lies not so much in developing new ideas as in escaping from old ones. The youth are always complaining that older people don't listen to them and that they're not taken seriously. Because as older people, I'm old, seen a lot, we have a lot of experiences, and we've recognized patterns. And therefore we think that that's the only way that things can be done, or it's the best way that things can be done. But unfortunately, as psychology and as quantum mechanics have taught us, actually the way we see things, like our literal experience, can't be trusted because we have things known as different biases, confirmation bias, the observer effect, whereby just because you think that something is going to work out a certain way, it does. And that doesn't mean to say it can't work out in another way. And that's why old ideas get stuck. And that's why it's really, really hard to break those patterns, especially when they become institutionalized. Cosmin, which author are you referring to now? Because I mentioned a couple of books. So do you mean the Thinking Fast and Slow guy? Because, well, I should know that. And it's, the quote. All right. The quote is from John Maynard Keynes. I'll type it in here so you've got the spelling. There you go. Right. So this has been a bit of a rocket ship ride through my approach to an attitude to change, and how by adjusting your mental attitude and embracing some of the fundamental principles of creative thinking, you can actually set yourself up to benefit from change instead of allowing it to threaten you. You know, when you consistently make space for creative thought, for a creative mind state, what you're essentially doing is you're embracing change. So therefore, events don't tend to ambush you anymore, because you may even have actually anticipated it. So this is why it really irritates me when I hear companies talking about their culture of innovation. And what they mean is they have an innovation lab, or they have a monthly brainstorm. But no one in their job is allowed to deviate from their standard operating procedure for 1 second during their working day. And that they micromanage everybody and they measure outcomes according to KPIs and KPAs. That is not a culture of innovation. That's having an innovation lab and a couple of workshops. You know, to have a culture of innovation, creative thinking is going to be built into every single day. Because just like playing football or golf or playing a musical instrument, you need to hone the skill. You need to turn up. You need to try it out. You need to try again. You need to fail. Because as we all know these days, you know, failing is the new succeeding. But you learn when you fail. You gather more dots, and then you can move on to the next one. So we've got 6 minutes left. Any questions about anything I said or didn't say? A pleasure, Chris. I hope you are suitably triggered. That's why I call myself a creativity activator. Get you switched on, going. No, nobody? What about collaborative creativity? Yeah, I think it's hugely important. And I think actually that no creativity occurs in a vacuum, because we all live in an environment with other human beings. And you can either consciously address that, or it can happen unconsciously because of the information you're getting from other people. But collaborative creativity is definitely a thing. Are companies waking up? No. No, they're not. It took COVID-19 for them to realize that remote working was a thing, and that people could be trusted to do their jobs and would do them just as well. Muppets. Yeah, just like politicians. Even bigger Muppets. We could do without them. You know, if we were all more creative, if we actually believed that we could solve all the problems in our world, we wouldn't need politicians. What's holding them back? Fear, lack of imagination, and this obsession with delivering shareholder profit above everything. You know, everything's measured from quarter to quarter and the profit's ripped out. There's no long-term vision. There's no big picture. That's what's going wrong with modern business. And it has been going wrong since the 80s, I think. What's holding them back? Yeah, it's addiction to short-term profit. There's no other way of saying it, I'm afraid. And yeah, look, the way we're schooled doesn't help. Standardized testing. You know, it took ages for people to realize that IQ tests were biased according to culture. So what do we do? Lauren, you do what I'm suggesting. You make time to think, and you read, and you learn, and you experiment, and you try. Because by doing that, you will generate options. And when you've got options, then you've got real choice. That's the key. You've got to apply these principles so that you can make options for yourself. And no, it's not all about new ideas. I mean, there are very few actual new ideas, really. So I think, especially in an age where people are forgetting old skills and old ways of doing things, it's an amazing source for things that you could bend, blend, or break and apply in new ways to this brave new world of ours. Lauren, how do we work together? Well, I mean, coming to a thing like this is definitely part of it. You've got to make human connection. We're also dots. Each individual is a dot. So, there's a networking function here. You could be very quickly now going on LinkedIn and seeking out everybody who's in this chat and sending them a connection request. You've got to be a little less protective of your stuff. And yeah, you've got to let go and get ambiguous. And not everyone's on LinkedIn. No, you're right. It's a pity that. I wish it would, yeah. I've actually got a friend here in the Netherlands who is invisible. You can't even find him using Google. It's awesome. You're given time. Can you create exactly at that time? Yes, in fact, I can, because I practice doing it. So in my other life, I'm also a poet. And I spent 2 years, well, 18 months actually, publishing a poem on Facebook every day for 18 months. I would get up at 5 a.m. and I would write. And for 18 months, I was able to do that consistently because I practiced it. It became such a routine that I would get up, I would sit down, poetry brain would come on. It's like Pavlov's dog, but you've got to condition the response. I stopped because I had enough poems for a book. I'm still publishing poetry though, but just not on Facebook. And I'm sorry, that just went quiet there for a second. And if you're interested in poetry, this is where you can find it. Discipline, I sometimes find is an overrated word. For me, it's about priorities. And it's a horrible way to say it, but yeah, if you got your priorities right, you're going to find time. And yes, I do have kids too, age 3 and 1, and I'm still writing every day. So we've got 1 minute to go. So I think that's probably it. Lara, do you want to jump back into the chat or into yeah, there she is.
Yes. Sorry again for not having video.
It's okay. It's okay.
It was really inspiring.
Cool.
It was really good. Thank you everybody for attending, and hope to see you all in the next session as well. They will be very interesting, I'm sure. And cool. Thank you, David.
It's a pleasure. And everybody, if you enjoyed what I had to say today and you want to know more, go onto my website, sign up for my newsletter, and you'll get news from me every 2 weeks, all about creativity stuff. So don't be shy. Don't be a stranger. Make contact.
Have a nice evening, everybody.
Thank you. Ciao, everyone.
Bye.